Hi everyone, I'm Joe. Today it's time for me to do a book review of The Salvation Sequence written by Peter F. Hamilton. This trilogy is comprised of Salvation, Salvation Lost, and finally The Saints of Salvation. You really can't mistake this for any other trilogy because the word salvation is in every book. Now this is a science fiction trilogy. It is specifically a space opera subgenre trilogy, of which Peter F. Hamilton is very well known, and I am quite well known for reading Peter F. Hamilton. I've reviewed many of his books, and now that I've read these, I have now become fully up to date with reading every book that he has ever written, which I'm quite pleased about. So these were first published between the years of 2018 and 2020, and I will give a brief synopsis. So this is set in the fairly near future. Humanity has spread to the stars, greatly helped by one particular technology, and that is essentially portal doorways. Think of the Stargates from the science fiction television series Stargate SG-1, which for the record I'm a big fan of. Basically they're like them, but smaller and more sort of standard door-like, where you can just travel between worlds at a distance. This has greatly opened up the ability for humans to make colonies on other worlds and space stations and mining opportunities. So resources are nowhere near as limited. Now we're not in the unlimited potential that we could be, because it's still relatively early days, but Earth is starting to really improve with its environment and nature and things, because now we're not having to rip the Earth apart to get the materials we want. We can take it from other things in the solar system, which is greatly beneficial. Now technology and such is really quite advanced, but there's one technology that we get from a different source, and that is medical technology. Because one day an alien species arrives in orbit, we communicate with them, and they appear to be extremely benevolent and kind and generous, and they give us essentially several kinds of advanced medical technology, which basically means that we can repair and replace organs and such really quite easily with these essentially like kind of nanotechnology type idea, which appears really good. However, there is a faction in the overall world government that is obviously very suspicious of this alien species, because why are they just arriving in orbit now and appearing to be really nice and generous and giving with all their technology, which obviously must have took them a very long time to develop, and considering they are a spacefaring sort of travelling species, they haven't got limited resources, surely, or have they? Anyway, it will not be a surprise to learn, considering there is a trilogy, and frankly the way Peter F. Hamilton's books go, and it's been marketed as such, that this alien species is not ultimately that benevolent. They are doing everything they're doing for a fairly evil and nasty ulterior motive. They have a fairly strange and pretty disturbing religion that they follow, that basically they want to press it upon humanity, and humanity is not going to do well out of this. Actually, humanity will probably cease to exist by the end of the third book if the alien species get their way, which humanity is not keen on being wiped out, so they have to try to think of a solution to avoid their destruction. And this is where one of the main elements of the book come into play, and that is dual timelines. You have the first timeline is the current events, as humanity is trying to get to grasp with what is happening with this alien species. They're trying to defend and improve their technology as fast as they are physically able to, and it keeps working on from there throughout all three books. And the other timeline is set in the very far future, hundreds of thousands of years. You're not even sure how long. I mean, the people involved don't even know at this point, where this is a very far-flung humanity. Basically, this is the survivors and the humanity that came from Earth, living among the stars. This alien species is still there, and they want to get back to Earth one day. basically. So you got this split duality of timelines, which is really interesting. It's a little bit strange to read to start with, and I will admit that the first quarter of the first book, Salvation, I was a little bit doubtful whether I was actually enjoying the book, to be honest, because it was such a way that it just took me a while to get used to it. Once I did get used to it, however, and I realised what Hamilton was trying to do with the plot lines and these dual timelines, at least I thought I did anyway, and then it obviously twists and turns and there's surprises galore, then it worked much better, and I'd say definitely stick with it after the first little bit of the first book, because it's a bit strange, but it's well worth it in the end. And the plot line basically goes from there. Now what I just said isn't a spoiler, because the trilogy was basically sort of advertised really and pushed as, this benevolent species that is not benevolent. And since this is Hamilton, that's not unusual. He's used vaguely similar ideas in the past with greater worldly results and such, which is a very interesting one. Oh, and for the record, this is not set in any of his previously well-established worlds. I should have mentioned that at the start. Now, one of the things that I would normally talk about when I do reviews is the characters, and I will talk about them here. However, I am not going to talk about them by name, because there are frankly so many characters in the different groups that it would be too complex. However, I will talk about the major groups, and that is, one of them is essentially the sort of what I think of as the government group, the official group. They're ones that not just only government, but ones like engineers and such that are trying to think how to deal with this benevolent alien race and investigate that. You have a criminal group that appears to just be committing crimes, and it's a little bit strange to start with, but it actually does come into play in a really interesting way. And then you have the group of characters from the far future. They're all quite young. They're trying to sort of better themselves and prepare themselves for a time when they can basically sort of recover what humanity lost many hundreds of thousands of years ago. Basically become legends to them. These three groups, whilst they are mostly split up for the most part, doing their own thing, they do work together extremely well. They sort of bounce off each other in ways that you wouldn't expect, and they just work together well, because something that one group does will affect the other groups, even though it might not seem at the time. It takes a while to get going, but the groups sort of build up each other as well as themselves in a really interesting way. The individual characters that make up each group are all very interesting, at least I think so. Personally, they're all varied, got different personalities, and they all have different motives, and they're all twists and turns to do with characters. And overall, they really do fit the environment and the world, which I'm going to talk about next, because world building is something that Peter F. Hamilton has always done well of in the past, and frankly, that's not any different here. He's doing very well with what he's trying to portray with this trilogy. This is basically Earth for the most part, with future humanity off Earth on other worlds and such. And this duality is quite an interesting one, because you have Earth, which is familiar but not entirely, because of course the technology that we have in the near future Earth is a little bit different from our own. We have very advanced technology for the most part, and it's not utopia by any means, but it's certainly a step towards that kind of ideal world where things are nicer and friendlier, and frankly the environment's being sort of slowly repaired and such, because we have other worlds and stuff to get material from, so we don't have to rip our own planet apart. And it's an interesting environment. And then you've got the other worlds and indeed the other timeline to deal with. Obviously the worlds there are very different because it's far future, things have changed, and I don't want to say too much about that timeline and the worlds that you encounter there, but they are different, and the humanity and the people there they've got different psychology almost than the present timeline and what we're used to. and it creates this interesting duality and this interesting split, which I think is really well written and frankly just really well done. And normally at this point I would then talk about the greater sort of ideas and themes set within the book. But with P.F. Hamilton, whilst there are definitely some, it's mostly a kind of, I mean, it's space opera, so it's a big science fiction adventure set in several locations, although not as many as his previous books, by the way, because they often set on many locations. This is mostly Earth with a few others thrown in, with lots of characters, which is definitely the case here. And it's just this big adventure which is quite convoluted in some areas, which and indeed a bit tricky to follow. But once you get into it, you'll realise what he's trying to achieve, and you just can't put the books down, frankly, once you get going on it. I would say give the first book a bit of a chance though, because that first bit of the first book in Salvation, like I said previously, isn't easy going, which, I mean, I'm quite a big Peter F. Hamilton fan, and I'm saying it wasn't easy, so other people might struggle, maybe, but you know, everybody's different and might think of their own ideas. However, one idea that Peter F. Hamilton does essentially speak about and bring into this book is essentially the fact that humanity can and ultimately will do better than we are now. Yes, there may be this benevolent or so-called benevolent alien species there that could harm us. There may be all these other problems, but ultimately we can, if we put our minds to it, focus and essentially improve ourselves and improve the world around us, because we are destroying our own planet, which frankly he makes no qualms about bringing up. I mean, you know, environmentalism actually is something that he talks about in this book essentially, and he's trying to say that if we focus and if we work together, we can improve ourselves and, you know, improve our environment and just make ourselves happier overall without all the need for fighting continuously. There'll always be arguments. I mean, it's part of humanity, but we don't have to argue quite as much. And with that said, that is it for this review. If you have read this trilogy, or you would like to, or you've read other books by Peter F. Hamilton and you'd like to talk about them, then please leave a comment. Obviously, as always, if you have a suggestion on a book you think I might enjoy reading based on these, then of course leave a comment. I'm always eager to read new books, new authors and such. And with that said, that is it for this review. So the 3 links to these books can be found in the description box below, as always. All my social media links can be found there as well. And with that said, that is it for this video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you another day. Bye for now.